I am James Washington, 74 years old and somehow still reeling from wounds my own children inflicted. As a retired postal supervisor who worked 43 years for the government, I thought I'd earned respect and dignity in my golden years. But 2 weeks after we buried Beverly, they invited themselves over for what they called a family meeting. Between my untouched coffee and their rehearsed speeches, my son David leaned forward, his white wife Jennifer nodding beside him. "You know, Dad, you are lucky we even care enough to help. Pride goes a long way, but practicality pays the bills." I simply set my mug down and listened. That night I opened Beverly's secret folder and called the lawyer about activating the Portugal plan. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Birmingham, Alabama meant survival to my generation. But inside our modest 3-bedroom house with its small front porch and Beverly's carefully tended garden was a fortress of love and planning I thought my children understood. My kitchen painted pale yellow. At Beverly's insistence, despite my preference for white, became the battleground where they tried to auction off my independence. The phone had rung at 6 that morning, David's voice carrying that restrained impatience I'd known since he was a teenager asking for gas money. Only now, at 42, he wasn't asking. "We found a buyer, Dad. This place is too much for you alone." They had already calculated my life in spreadsheets, measured my worth in square footage, decided that a black man my age couldn't possibly manage his own affairs. They assumed I carried debt like so many of our neighbors assumed Beverly's medical bills had broken us. What they didn't know was that Beverly Washington had been 10 steps ahead of them for years, and she'd taught her husband how to play chess while they were still learning checkers. "David," I said, keeping my tone even, "you've been planning this for a while." "That's called being responsible," he countered. "We can't sit around until something happens to you." I let the sentence hang there ugly and unpolished. "Until something happens to you." "Thanks for your concern," I said, my voice as flat as the morning light across the kitchen counter. "I'll think about it." "Dad," but I ended the call before he could sell me my own life in bullet points. An hour later, Jennifer's silver BMW pulled into my driveway with the precision of a surgical instrument. She stepped out carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, her blonde hair pulled back in what Beverly used to call a boardroom bun. Everything about Jennifer screamed efficiency, from her pressed slacks to her practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. "James?" she said, letting herself in without waiting for an invitation. "I hope David didn't upset you earlier. You know how he gets when he's worried." She spread papers across my kitchen table like a general planning a siege. Legal documents, financial projections, architectural drawings. The basement apartment plan was rendered in cheerful pastels that couldn't disguise what it really was, a cell with a kitchenette. "We've designed your space," she said, pointing to the drawings with a manicured finger. "Full bathroom, separate entrance, even a little sitting area. You'd have complete privacy while still being close to family." Privacy. The word tasted like copper pennies in my mouth. "It's really quite generous." She continued, her voice taking on that particular tone white people use when they're about to tell you what's good for you. "Most people your age, especially in your circumstances, would be grateful for this kind of arrangement." Your circumstances. Not our circumstances. Mine. As if being a 74-year-old black man automatically made me a charity case. "The market analysis shows your house is worth more than you'd expect," she said, sliding another document toward me. "We could clear the contractor costs for the basement renovation and still have plenty left over for Zoe's education. It's really a win-win for everyone." Win-win. There it was again, that phrase that meant everybody wins except the person being won against. "And David mentioned the mortgage situation," she added delicately. "We understand you might be behind on payments. There's no shame in that. Medical bills can devastate even the most careful planners." Before I could correct her assumption, my daughter Keisha's Camry pulled up behind Jennifer's BMW. Keisha stepped out looking like she'd rather be anywhere else, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from a double shift. At 40, she carried herself with the tired dignity of a single mother who'd learned to fight every battle twice.
"Hey, Daddy,"
she said, kissing my cheek. Her embrace felt apologetic, like she was already sorry for what was coming. Keisha, Jennifer said brightly. Perfect timing. I was just showing your father the basement plans. Keisha glanced at the papers, then at me. Daddy, I think this might be, it could be good for you, having family close. But her voice carried no conviction, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. This was my daughter who'd worked 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school, who'd never asked me for a dime she couldn't pay back. Now she stood in my kitchen enlisted in someone else's campaign. We've all discussed it, Jennifer continued smoothly. As a family, we think it's the most practical solution for everyone involved. The word hit me like a physical blow. Family. As if the 3 of them had held a board meeting about my life and voted me off the island of my own independence. I looked at Keisha, really looked at her. The dark circles under her eyes, the way she held her shoulders like she was carrying invisible weight. When did this meeting happen? I asked quietly. She couldn't meet my gaze. Last week, at David's house. We're worried about you, Daddy, living here alone. Last week. While I was still finding Beverly's reading glasses on random tables and hearing her voice in empty rooms, they'd been planning my future around someone else's dining room table. We know what's best for people your age, Jennifer said, her smile growing more fixed. The statistics on elderly men living alone are quite sobering. People your age. Not you specifically, James Washington, who'd run a postal facility with 200 employees and never missed a day of work in 43 years. Just people your age, a demographic to be managed and relocated. The realization hit me with crystal clarity. This wasn't about my well-being. This was about liquidating an asset that happened to have my name on it. And Beverly. God rest her soul, had seen it coming long before I had. After they left, I stood in the hallway for a long time. The late morning light slanted through the front windows, catching dust on the console table. Beverly's reading glasses were still there, folded neatly on top of a paperback she'd never finish. I reached out to touch them, then stopped. Touching them felt like a step I wasn't ready to take. My feet carried me without thinking to her study. The room smelled of lemon oil and the faint trace of her perfume, something floral and subtle that clung to the curtains. Her desk was exactly as she'd left it, pen resting diagonally across a yellow legal pad, the corner of an envelope peeking from under a stack of papers. I sat in her chair. The leather was worn smooth where her elbows had rested. For the first time in 2 weeks, my shoulders eased. There was a bottom drawer on the left stiff from years of sticking. I pulled it open. Inside were the usual layers of life-old tax returns, appliance manuals, greeting cards from grandchildren. Beneath them, my fingers found the edge of a pale blue folder. It was heavier than it looked. The paper inside shifted with a faint whisper, like it knew it had been waiting for me. I didn't open it immediately. I set it on the desk and rested my palm on the cover. A yellow sticky note was attached to the front. Beverly's handwriting in tidy block letters. When they circle you like vultures, use this. I sat there, the late morning light warming the side of my face, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt something other than loss. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was direction. When I finally opened the folder, the first thing I saw was a stack of financial statements. Bank accounts I didn't recognize, not the joint accounts we'd had for decades, but individual ones, all in Beverly's name. One was from a small credit union in another county, another from an online bank I'd never heard her mention. Each had modest sums, $8,400 here, $12,200 there. Not fortunes, but enough to make me wonder why they'd been kept separate. Under the statements were property documents. My breath caught when I saw the first, a deed for a villa in the Algarve region of Portugal purchased 10 years ago. The owner's name, Beverly Marie Washington. No mention of me. I flipped to the next page. A letter from a law firm in Lisbon dated last spring confirming the property's current value and offering to manage a rental contract. Beverly had declined in a handwritten note at the bottom. Not yet. Keep private. Private. The words sat there like a secret she'd kept even from me. There were more documents. Life insurance policies I'd never signed, all naming beneficiaries I expected David and Keisha. But one caught my eye, a newer policy much smaller with only one beneficiary listed, Zoe Washington. No mention of her parents. I leaned back in Beverly's chair. The lemon-scented polish in the wood seemed stronger now, mixing with the metallic taste that had risen in my mouth. Beverly had always been deliberate. She didn't forget things. If she'd kept this from me, it wasn't oversight, it was strategy. I picked up a smaller envelope tucked into the back of the folder. Inside was a letter dated 2 years ago, written in Beverly's looping cursive. "James, if you found this, I'm gone, and if I'm right, the calls have already started. They will circle you, not because they need you, but because they want what you've built. I've watched it for years. Small comments, questions about money, the way they count what isn't theirs yet. You've always given them the benefit of the doubt. I stopped doing that long ago. The house is yours, it stays yours. I paid it off so you'd never have to answer to them about it. But I also knew they'd try to make you believe you couldn't manage alone. That's why there's a second plan. The villa in Portugal is for you, but not on paper yet. You'll find instructions in the back. Follow them if you need to disappear for a while. Sometimes the only way to win is not to play their game. Don't let our children mistake your kindness for weakness, James, and don't let them mistake their inheritance for an entitlement. They'll learn the difference between what they want and what they've earned." Beverly's voice was in my head as I read, calm, even not angry, but certain. I turned to the back pocket of the folder. There was a typed page with contacts for the Lisbon law firm, a local caretaker named Anna Santos, and a key taped to the paper. Next to the key was a note in Beverly's hand, "Trust Anna. She owes me her life. Long story." I let the paper fall onto the desk. My pulse was steady, but my mind was racing. Beverly had seen this day coming before I'd even noticed the storm clouds gathering. She'd watched our children calculate our worth while I'd been proud of their success, blind to the fact that they'd begun to see us as assets rather than parents. For the rest of the afternoon, I moved through the house like a man walking in 2 timelines at once. Every object I passed: the framed photo of David at his college graduation, Jennifer's ceramic vase from their wedding, Keisha's nursing school diploma, Zoe's crayon drawing of our garden, now felt like evidence in a case I hadn't known I was building. In the kitchen, I found myself staring at the spice rack Beverly had arranged by height, not alphabetically. She'd always said it looked better that way, but now I wondered how many small, deliberate choices she had made that I'd never questioned. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the sink watching the late afternoon light turn the garden gold. I remembered the last conversation Beverly and I had about the kids before she got sick. "They love you," I'd said, irritated that she'd been distant with David during his last visit. "They love the version of me that helps them," she'd replied. "The version that says yes." I'd dismissed it at the time as one of her darker moods. Now it played back in my mind like a warning I'd ignored. That evening, David called again. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "Dad, just think about what I said. We can make this easy for you. Don't make it harder than it needs to be." Easy for him, maybe. Jennifer texted an hour later. "We'll come by Saturday to talk. Bring Zoe. It'll be good to see you." The phrasing wasn't lost on me. Bring Zoe. Like I was the guest, not the host. I put the phone face down and went back to Beverly's study. The folder was still on the desk. I opened it again, this time studying the insurance policy naming Zoe. The date was from last year, well after Beverly's diagnosis. She'd made a choice. As the night settled over the house, I turned on the lamp in the study. The warm pool of light caught on the edge of a photograph tucked in the back of the folder. It was of Beverly and Zoe in the garden, both wearing straw hats, their hands dirty from planting herbs. Beverly's arm was around Zoe, her smile wide and unguarded. On the back, Beverly had written, "Teach her how to keep what matters." I sat with that photograph for a long time. The room was silent, except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the one Beverly insisted we keep even when it ran slow. I thought about calling Zoe, telling her everything. But Beverly's note said, "If you need to disappear, not if you need to explain." This wasn't the time to show my cards. Not yet. Near midnight, I locked the study door for the first time in years. The folder went into the bottom drawer of my desk, not Beverly's. The key to the villa went into the small safe behind the bookcase, the one no one but Beverly and I knew existed. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on the shelf, listening to the quiet house. Somewhere in the darkness, I could almost hear Beverly's voice. You don't have to fight the way they expect. The next morning, I woke before dawn. I made coffee, drank it this time, and sat at the kitchen table with a pad of paper. I wrote 2 columns, what they know and what they don't. The first list was short. The second was longer than I expected. When the sun finally broke over the garden, I looked at the lemon tree and thought about Portugal, about Ana Santos, whoever she was, about disappearing, not out of fear but on my terms. For the first time since Beverly's funeral, I felt something sharp under the grief. Not anger exactly, but resolve. They thought I was an old man standing on the edge of a cliff waiting to be pushed. They had no idea I'd already built a bridge. Saturday came with a pale winter sun, thin and reluctant. I'd been up since 6, walking the garden paths in my coat, feeling the crunch of frost under my boots. But first, there was a call I needed to make. I picked up the phone and dialed the Lisbon number Beverly had left me. The international dial tone felt like a heartbeat in a foreign language. When the line clicked, a woman's voice answered with a slight Portuguese accent. Hola, Ana Santos. I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Sim, this is Ana. Who is calling, please? My name is James Washington. Beverly Washington was my wife. She told me to call you when the wolves came. There was a pause on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. Ah, Senor Washington. Yes, Beverly told me you would call when they came for you. The wolves, she called them. Your children, yes. Yes, I said, surprised by how easily the word came out. I have been waiting. Anna said, her English accented but precise. Your Beverly, she was very smart woman. She knew this day would come. She prepared everything. Anna, I said, Beverly mentioned that you owed her your life. Can you tell me about that? A long pause, then Anna's voice softer now. Your wife, she saved my family. This was 15 years ago. My husband, he was good man, but not good with papers. Immigration papers, very complicated. We had lawyer, but he was not honest, man. He took our money, did nothing. We were going to be sent back to Portugal, my children too, even though they were born here in America. I could hear the emotion in her voice as she continued. Beverly, she was working at the community center, then helping immigrants with English classes. When she heard our story, she became like a lion, Senor Washington. She found us new lawyer, good lawyer. She sat with us at every meeting, made sure we understood everything. She even paid the lawyer fees when we could not. That sounds like Beverly, I said, my throat tight. But that is not all, Anna continued. When the immigration judge, he was being difficult. Your Beverly, she wrote letters. She called people. She fought for us like we were her own family. Because of her, my children got to stay in America, got to go to college. My daughter, she is doctor now. My son, he is teacher. All because of your Beverly. I closed my eyes, seeing Beverly in my mind, fierce and protective, fighting for people she barely knew because it was the right thing to do. So when she came to me 2 years ago, Anna said, when she was sick but still planning, still protecting, I told her whatever you need, Anna will do. She asked me to watch over the house in Portugal to keep it ready. She said one day, her James would need a place where the wolves could not follow. The house is ready, I asked. Sempre, Anna said, always. I check it every month. Fresh linens, everything clean. The papers, they are with the lawyer in Lisbon waiting for your signature. Your Beverly, she set up everything so you could disappear, Senor Washington, so you could have peace. I felt something shift in my chest, a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying beginning to lift. Anna, I said, I think it might be time. Sim, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I will call Lisboa today. The papers will be ready when you arrive. And Senor Washington, yes. Your Beverly. She was right about the wolves, but she was also right about you. You are stronger than they think. After we hung up, I stood in Beverly's study looking out at the garden we had built together. The lemon tree needed pruning, but someone else would have to do it now. I had a plane to catch. For the first time since the funeral, I felt like I could breathe. The next morning, I didn't wait for David and Jennifer to show up with their spreadsheets and basement blueprints. I had my own appointment to keep. Peter Klein's office sat in a restored brick building downtown, the kind of place that whispered competence without shouting about it. I'd found his name in Beverly's address book, written in her careful handwriting next to a note that said, trusts the process, not the performance. His receptionist, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes, offered me coffee and water. I took both out of respect for the ritual. When Peter stepped out, he was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with the calm demeanor of a man who'd learned that most legal problems were really people problems in disguise. "Mr. Washington," he said, extending his hand, "I'm sorry for your loss. Beverly was a remarkable woman. You knew her. She consulted with me about estate planning 3 years ago. Very thorough, very determined. She said she was preparing for a war that hadn't started yet." We sat in his conference room and I placed Beverly's blue folder on the table between us. "I think the war has started," I said. Peter opened the folder methodically, his expression growing more interested with each document. When he reached the house deed, he stopped and looked up at me. "She transferred the entire property to your sole ownership 2 years ago," he said. "Quit claim deed properly recorded, no encumbrances. Your children have no legal claim to this property." "I didn't know," I said. "She was protecting you," Peter said simply. "Beverly told me about your family's financial expectations. She also told me about your experiences with housing discrimination when you were younger." The memories came flooding back. 1975, trying to buy our first house, being shown properties in more suitable neighborhoods, having loan applications mysteriously delayed or denied. Beverly had been the one to research fair housing laws, to document every discriminatory practice, to fight until we got the house we wanted in the neighborhood where we planned to raise our children. "She learned the system so she could beat it," Peter continued. "And she taught you well enough to help me beat it now." He pulled out a legal pad and began writing. "Here's what we're going to do. First, cease and desist letters to any real estate agents your children have contacted. They have no authority to list or sell your property, and continuing to do so constitutes tortious interference." "They found a buyer," I said. "They found disappointment," Peter replied dryly. "Second, we're going to file a formal notice with the county recorder's office stating that you are the sole owner of the property and that any attempts to sell or encumber it without your explicit written consent are fraudulent." I watched him work his pen, moving with the precision of a surgeon. "There's something else," I said, and told him about the conservatorship threat. Peter's expression hardened. "That's a serious accusation to make without evidence. Conservatorships are meant to protect vulnerable adults, not convenient ones. Do you have any cognitive impairment, Mr. Washington?" "None." "Any history of financial irresponsibility? 43 years of federal employment, perfect credit, no bankruptcies or major debts." "Any documented medical conditions that would affect your judgment?" "High blood pressure controlled with medication. That's it." Peter made more notes. "Then any conservatorship petition would be frivolous and possibly constitute harassment. We'll prepare a response documenting your competency and your children's financial motivations." He looked up at me, his expression serious. "Mr. Washington, I've seen this pattern before. Adult children who view their parents' assets as their inheritance, who mistake their parents' kindness for incapacity. It's more common than you'd think, and it often has racial undertones." "How so?" "The assumption that older black Americans can't manage their own affairs, that they need their more sophisticated children to make decisions for them. I've seen it in mixed marriages, especially where the white spouse feels entitled to make decisions about black family property." The words stung because they rang true. Jennifer's condescending tone, her casual assumption that I couldn't understand financial documents, her patronizing references to people my age. "Beverly saw it too," Peter continued. "She was very specific about protecting you from what she called well-meaning theft." He gathered the papers and stood up. "I'll have these documents prepared and filed by end of business today. The cease and desist letters will go out certified mail. Any real estate agent who continues to pursue this sale after receiving notice will face legal consequences." "How long will this take?" "The paperwork a few hours. The psychological impact on your children, that depends on how quickly they realize you're not the pushover they thought you were." As I prepared to leave, Peter handed me his card. "Mr. Washington, you built a life with Beverly that was worth protecting. Don't let anyone convince you that protecting it is selfish." Walking to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: control. Not the illusion of control that comes from pretending everything is fine, but the real thing. The kind that comes from having the law on your side and the will to use it. I stopped at the post office on the way home and rented a P.O. box. Small acts of independence, but independence nonetheless. By the time I got home, there was a voicemail from David. "Dad, we need to talk. Jennifer heard you were meeting with lawyers. That's not necessary. We can work this out as a family." Family. The word had lost its warmth, become something they wielded like a weapon. I deleted the message and went to Beverly's study. The afternoon light was slanting through the windows, and for the first time since her funeral, the room felt peaceful instead of haunting. I opened the folder again and looked at the photograph of Beverly and Zoe in the garden. "Teach her how to keep what matters," Beverly had written. The lesson was already in progress. Thursday arrived with a sky the color of wet stone. I woke knowing this would be the day everything came to a head. Sure enough, at 8:30 sharp, David called. "Dad, we need to meet today. This lawyer nonsense has to stop." "My house, 2 o'clock, I said. "Bring whoever you want." At exactly 2, David's SUV pulled up, followed by Jennifer's BMW and a third car I didn't recognize. David got out first, his jaw set like concrete, followed by Jennifer and a man in an expensive suit who screamed lawyer from his perfect haircut to his Italian shoes. They filed into my kitchen like a tribunal. David didn't bother with pleasantries. "Dad, this is Jeff Morrison. He's been our family attorney for years." Jeff extended his hand with the calculated warmth of a man who made his living managing difficult people. "Mr. Washington, David and Jennifer have filled me in on the situation. I'm here to help mediate what seems to be a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," I said, staying seated at my own table. "Your clients want to sell my house without my consent." Jeff smiled the way white lawyers smile at black men they think they can handle. "I think there's been some confusion about the family's intentions. Everyone just wants what's best for you." "Everyone?" I asked. "Who is everyone?" David leaned forward. "Dad, you're not thinking clearly since Mom died. Grief can affect judgment, especially at your age." "My age," I repeated. "What about my age concerns you?" Jeff jumped in smoothly. "Mr. Washington's statistics show that elderly individuals, particularly those who've recently lost a spouse, often struggle with complex financial decisions. Your children are simply trying to protect you from potential mistakes." "Protect me," I said. "From what exactly?" "From making decisions you might regret," Jennifer said. "The house is a huge responsibility. The upkeep, the taxes, the isolation." "Isolation," I said. "Is that what we're calling independence now?" Jeff pulled out a folder. "Mr. Washington, I've taken the liberty of reviewing some publicly available information about your property. The tax burden alone represents a significant portion of your fixed income." "How would you know my income?" I asked. "Well," Jeff stammered, "David mentioned that your pension and Social Security probably don't cover all your expenses." "David mentioned," I repeated. "What else did David mention?" Jeff regained his footing. "Look, we all want the same thing here, a secure, comfortable future for you. The basement apartment plan is really quite generous." "Generous?" I said. "A basement!" David's patience snapped. "Dad, stop playing games. We're trying to help you. If you won't listen to reason, we'll have to pursue other options." "What options?" "Legal guardianship," Jeff said smoothly. "It's a common solution when elderly individuals can't manage their affairs properly." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, who was now threatening to have me declared incompetent so he could control my property. "You'd really do that?" I asked quietly. "Only if you force us to," David said. "Dad, you're living in the past. This house is too much for you. You need help making rational decisions." "Rational decisions," I said. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out my phone, setting it on the table. The red recording dot was clearly visible. The room went silent. "You've been recording us," Jennifer gasped. "I've been preserving conversations," I said calmly. "For my protection." Jeff's professional composure cracked. Mr. Washington, in this state, recording conversations without consent is legal, I interrupted. When one party to the conversation consents, I consent to recording my own conversations in my own home. I looked directly at David. You just threatened to have me declared incompetent so you could control my property. That threat is now preserved on multiple devices backed up to cloud storage and will be part of my defense when you try to follow through. David's face had gone pale. Dad, I didn't mean... You meant exactly what you said, I said. Jeff, as an officer of the court, you just participated in what sounds like a conspiracy to defraud an elderly person of their property rights. How do you think that will play before a judge? Jeff stood up abruptly. I think this meeting is over. I think you're right, I said. David, Jennifer, I want you to listen very carefully. I am not selling my house. I am not moving into your basement. I am not turning my financial decisions over to you, and if you pursue any legal action to force me to do otherwise, I will defend myself with every resource at my disposal. Jeff was already heading for the door. David, Jennifer, I think we need to reconsider our approach here. Our approach? David asked. There is no our anymore, Jeff said firmly. I can't represent you in a conservatorship proceeding against someone who's clearly competent and has documented your threats. That's career suicide. As they filed out, Jennifer turned back one last time. James, please don't make this harder than it has to be. I'm not making it anything, I said. You are. After they left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time looking at the phone on the table. The recording had stopped automatically, but the damage was done. In 10 minutes, they'd destroyed whatever illusion of family unity we'd been maintaining. But for the first time since Beverly's funeral, I felt like myself again. Not the grieving widower they wanted to manage, but James Washington, the man who'd fought housing discrimination and workplace racism and every other challenge life had thrown at him. Beverly had been right about the wolves, but she'd also been right about me. That evening, I knew there was one more conversation I needed to have, and it couldn't wait. I sat at my kitchen table with my phone looking at Zoe's contact information. It was time she knew the truth about everything, including some truths I suspected would surprise her. I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright with the energy of a 19-year-old who still believed the world was fundamentally fair. Grandpa, I was just thinking about you. Mom said you guys had some kind of family meeting today. We did, I said. Zoe, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Okay, she said, and I could hear her settling into a quieter space. The money I've been sending you for college, $500 a month for the past 2 years. You've been getting it right. Silence, not the comfortable kind. Grandpa, what money? My heart sank into my stomach. Zoe, I've been sending you $500 every month since your sophomore year started. Direct deposit to your checking account. She started, then stopped. I get deposits, but Mom told me those were from her and Dad. She said they were struggling to help me working extra hours, making sacrifices. I closed my eyes. Beverly had been right about everything. Grandpa, are you saying those deposits are from you? Every one, I said quietly. $12,000 over 2 years. I could hear her breathing change, becoming shallower. But Mom said... She said they were barely making ends meet helping me. She said I should be grateful because they were choosing my education over their own comfort. Your mother and father aren't paying for your college, Zoe, I am. The line went quiet for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Zoe, I'm here, she whispered. I don't understand. Why would they lie? Because in our family, pride is complicated, I said. Your mother grew up watching her parents struggle, watching other families struggle. She learned that asking for help was weakness, that being the helper was strength. She wanted you to see her as the strong one. But it's not their money, Zoe said, her voice getting smaller. No, it's not. And they know exactly where every dollar comes from. I heard her start to cry, not the dramatic sobs of teenage heartbreak, but the quiet tears that come when the world shifts under your feet. Grandpa, I wrote them thank you cards. I told all my friends how amazing my parents were working so hard for my education. I felt guilty every time I bought something that wasn't absolutely necessary. I know, sweetheart. How long has this been going on? Just the college money. I hesitated, then decided she deserved the whole truth. Your mother has been managing my financial help to the family for years. When you needed your wisdom teeth out, when your dad's business had that rough patch, when your car broke down. I've been helping, but they've been taking credit. Oh my God, she breathed. That's why they're so mad about the house thing. They're used to having access to your money. Smart girl. Beverly's granddaughter through and through. There's something else you need to understand, Zoe. In black families, especially families like ours, who came from nothing money and help come with complicated feelings. Your parents aren't bad people, but they've confused being proud with being honest. What do you mean? Your mother learned from her mother that accepting help was shameful, that it meant you'd failed somehow. But giving help that made you powerful, worthy of respect. So when I help, she needs to believe she's the one really helping. That's messed up, Zoe said bluntly. It's human, I said, but it's also wrong, especially when it involves lying to you. Grandpa, what about my dad? Does he know? Your father has always known exactly where the money comes from, but it's easier for him to let your mother handle the narrative, especially when that narrative makes them look good. Zoe was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, older. That's why they want to sell your house. They think your money belongs to them. Part of it, yes. And the basement apartment thing, a way to control my spending while still having access to my resources. That's disgusting, she said, and I was proud of the anger in her voice. Good anger, righteous anger. Zoe, I want you to know that helping you has been one of the greatest joys of my life. Your education, your future, that's worth every penny. But you deserve to know who's actually making it possible. Grandpa, yes, sweetheart. I'm coming home this weekend, and I'm going to have some words with my parents. You don't have to. Yes, I do. They let me feel guilty for using money that wasn't even theirs. They let me write thank you notes for sacrifices they never made. That's not just lying to me that's making me complicit in the lie. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling something I hadn't expected: relief. Not just because Zoe knew the truth, but because she understood what the truth meant. She wasn't just angry about the deception. She was angry about being made to participate in it. Beverly would have been proud. We'd raised a granddaughter who recognized manipulation when she saw it, even when it came wrapped in family loyalty. The phone rang 20 minutes later. Keisha. Daddy, Zoe called me crying. What did you say to her? I told her the truth about who's been paying for her college. Silence. Keisha, did you really think I wouldn't tell her eventually? I hoped we could work this out as a family without involving her. You involved her the day you decided to take credit for my support. It wasn't like that, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. What was it like then? Another long pause. I wanted her to be proud of us, to see that we could take care of her. You can be proud of helping without lying about who's doing the helping. Daddy, I'm sorry, we've been struggling, and when she thanked us, it felt good to be seen as successful parents. At my expense. Yes, she said quietly. At your expense. I'm sorry. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. The moving company arrived at David and Jennifer's house on a crisp Monday morning at exactly 7:30. I had specifically requested that time because I knew David would be getting ready for work and Jennifer would be visible in her kitchen window making her organic smoothies and checking neighborhood social media on her iPad. Rodriguez, the crew chief, was a man who understood the power of precise timing. You sure about this address? He'd asked when I hired him. Very sure, I'd said, and make sure they sign for everything. I watched from my car parked 3 blocks away as the white moving truck rumbled down their manicured street. In Oakwood Heights, moving trucks were events. Neighbors appeared at windows, dog walkers slowed their pace. Joggers found sudden reasons to stretch on nearby sidewalks. The crew began unloading boxes with methodical efficiency. Each box was labeled in my careful handwriting, David Washington, personal items, from James Washington. The specificity was intentional. No room for confusion about who was sending what to whom. David's high school football trophies came off the truck, first gleaming plastic figures that had once meant everything to a 17-year-old boy who believed success was measured in touchdowns and scholarship offers. Behind them, his Letterman jacket still wrapped in the dry cleaning plastic from 1998, never worn after graduation because adult David was embarrassed by teenage David's achievements. The neighbors were definitely watching now. Mrs. Patterson from next door had abandoned all pretense and stood openly on her porch with her coffee mug. The Hendersons across the street had their blinds cracked just enough to observe the proceedings. In a neighborhood where image was currency, a moving truck at 7:30 in the morning was a scandal begging for explanation. Jennifer's wedding china came next, the elaborate place settings she'd insisted on registering for but had never used because she was always worried about chips and stains. 12 place settings for a woman who rarely entertained more than her book club, and even then preferred disposable plates for convenience. The crew chief rang the doorbell with the patient professionalism of a man who'd delivered difficult news before. Through my car window, I could see David answer in his bathrobe, hair still messy from sleep. Even from 3 blocks away, his body language screamed confusion and mounting embarrassment. A typed note was taped to each box. Identical messages in my formal business correspondence style. David and Jennifer, these items have been stored in my house for over 20 years. As you are now interested in managing property and belongings, I thought you should manage your own first. All items are in the same condition as when you left them. Please acknowledge receipt. James Washington. The beauty of the gesture wasn't in its cruelty but in its absolute reasonableness. I wasn't stealing from them or damaging their property. I was simply returning what was already theirs, forcing them to confront the difference between ownership and storage, between responsibility and convenience. David came outside in his bathrobe and slippers, probably hoping to minimize the spectacle. Too late. The Hendersons' teenage son was now openly recording with his phone from their front yard, probably already uploading to TikTok with hashtags about family drama in suburbia. Jennifer appeared in designer pajamas that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget, her blonde hair perfect even at 7:30 in the morning. She surveyed the boxes with the expression of someone who just discovered termites in her foundation. The crew chief extended his clipboard for signatures. David signed with the mechanical movements of a man in shock. Jennifer stood beside him, arms crossed, clearly calculating the social damage. How do you explain to neighbors that your elderly father-in-law has just publicly returned your childhood memorabilia? What narrative makes you the victim in that scenario? By the time the truck pulled away, at least 6 neighbors had found reasons to be outside. Dog walking, jogging, checking mailboxes, watering plants that didn't need watering. The kind of audience you never want when your family business becomes street theater. My phone rang as I drove home. What the hell was that supposed to accomplish? David demanded. Property management, I said calmly. You're so concerned about managing mine, I thought you should practice with your own. You humiliated us in front of the entire neighborhood. I returned your belongings to your house. How is that humiliating? You know exactly what you did. I do, I said. The question is, do you? Jennifer grabbed the phone. James, this was petty and cruel. What will people think? They'll think your father-in-law cleaned out some storage space, I said, unless you tell them otherwise, but then you'd have to explain why you're upset about getting your own things back. The line went quiet. The trap was perfect in its simplicity. Complaining about the gesture meant admitting they viewed my house as their personal storage facility, that they'd never intended to actually claim responsibility for their abandoned possessions. This doesn't change anything, David said when he got the phone back. We still think selling is the best option. You're welcome to think whatever you want, I said. From your own house, with your own things. I hung up and drove home, past the garden Beverly and I had built, past the lemon tree that still needed pruning, past the life I'd protected with nothing more than a moving truck and perfect timing. Sometimes the most devastating attacks are the ones that look like kindness from the outside. Let the neighbors wonder why successful David and Jennifer Washington were so upset about receiving boxes of their own belongings from a thoughtful father-in-law. The answer to that question would tell them everything they needed to know about who my children had become. David arrived at my house 40 minutes after the moving truck had left his. His BMW screeched into my driveway with the dramatic flair of a man who'd temporarily forgotten he lived in a neighborhood with a homeowners association. Jennifer followed in her car, mascara streaked down her cheeks like war paint smeared by defeat. They didn't knock. David used the spare key he'd never returned from helping Beverly during her treatments, barging into my kitchen like he was conducting a raid. "What kind of sick game are you playing?" he shouted, his face red with a mixture of rage and public humiliation. Jennifer collapsed into one of my kitchen chairs, sobbing into her hands. "The neighbors, James." Everyone was watching. Mrs. Patterson asked if we were having financial troubles. "Are you?" I asked, mildly, staying seated at my table with Beverly's blue folder open in front of me. "That's not the point." David slammed his palm on the table, making Beverly's coffee mug jump. "You made us look like freeloaders in front of the entire neighborhood. Did I return your property to your house like a considerate father-in-law?" "You know exactly what you did," Jennifer said through her tears. "You humiliated us, made us look like we've been using you." "Have you been using me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. David's mouth opened and closed without sound. Jennifer's crying intensified. "That's what I thought," I said quietly. "Now sit down, both of you. It's time you learned about the rest of your inheritance." Something in my tone made David finally take a seat. I pulled out the document I'd been saving for this moment, the second property deed Beverly had filed just 6 months before her death. "Your mother was a smart woman," I began. "Smarter than any of us gave her credit for. She saw this day coming years ago, watched you both calculating what you'd inherit while she was still breathing." I slid the deed across the table. "This house and the 2 acres of land it sits on are no longer mine to sell." David grabbed the paper, his eyes scanning frantically. "What is this?" "A conservation trust," I said. "Filed with the county 6 months before your mother died. The property is permanently protected from development or sale. It will be maintained as a family homestead in perpetuity." "That's impossible," Jennifer said, wiping her eyes. "We checked the public records." "You checked the records you knew to look for," I corrected. "Your mother was very careful about timing and filing procedures." David's face was turning an alarming shade of purple. "You can't just give away our inheritance." "I didn't give away anything," I said calmly. "Your grandmother did, and she didn't give it away, she preserved it for the right person." I pulled out another document. "Zoe Washington is listed as the sole beneficiary and future trustee of the Washington Family Conservation Trust. She'll inherit not just this house, but the responsibility to maintain it for future generations." The silence that followed was profound. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking, the refrigerator humming, a dog barking somewhere down the street. "Zoe," Jennifer whispered. "But she's just a child." "She's 19, I said. "Old enough to vote, old enough to serve in the military, old enough to understand the difference between inheritance and entitlement." David found his voice. "This is insane. You're cutting us out completely." "I'm not cutting anyone out," I said. "Your grandmother made these decisions before she died based on what she observed about your character. She believed Zoe would be a better steward of this property than either of you." "Based on what?" Jennifer demanded. "Based on watching Zoe spend summers here helping with the garden while you two spent them complaining about property taxes. Based on watching her ask what she could do to help while you asked what you could get. Based on understanding that some things matter more than money." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Beverly and I had built together. "Your grandmother used to say something that I didn't understand until recently. This family has a history of treating its elders like assets rather than ancestors. She meant her parents, my parents, the way families like ours sometimes lose sight of respect in pursuit of resources." I turned back to face them. "She saw you both doing the same thing to us. Counting our house, our savings, our Social Security payments like they were already yours, planning our funerals before we were dead." David stood up abruptly. "That's not fair." Neither is threatening conservatorship proceedings against a competent adult because he won't sell his house, I replied. Neither is lying to your daughter about who's paying for her college. Neither is treating your father-in-law's grief as an opportunity for real estate speculation. Jennifer looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. So that's it. 20 years of marriage into this family and we get nothing. You get what you've earned, I said, which is a very expensive lesson about the difference between family and opportunity. I walked back to the table and closed Beverly's folder. The trust is irrevocable. The property cannot be sold, cannot be mortgaged, cannot be developed. Zoe will inherit it when she turns 25, along with enough money to maintain it properly. What money? David asked suspiciously. The money your mother saved from all those mortgage payments we supposedly couldn't afford, I said. Turns out when you pay off your house early and invest the payment money for 6 years, it grows quite substantially. I looked at both of them, these people who had been part of my family for so long I'd forgotten they'd never really understood what family meant. You can contest the trust if you want, I said, but I should warn you your mother anticipated that too. She left very detailed documentation about your financial expectations, your attempts to pressure her into home equity loans, your suggestions about maximizing our assets. David deflated like a punctured balloon. Jennifer just stared at the table. There's one more thing, I said gently. The trust has a provision that if anyone contests it or attempts to pressure Zoe into selling, they're permanently barred from the property. That includes visits, holidays, family gatherings. Your mother wanted to make sure Zoe could make her own choices without interference. I walked to the front door and held it open. I think we're done here. As they walked past me, Jennifer turned back one last time. James, please. We're family. Family, I said quietly, doesn't threaten to have you declared incompetent so they can steal your house? After they left, I stood in my kitchen for a long time looking at the space where Beverly's folder had been. The house felt different now, not empty but clear, like weather moving through after a storm. I picked up my phone and called Zoe. Grandpa, how did it go? Your grandmother's plan worked perfectly, I said. What happens now? I looked out at the garden at the lemon tree that still needed pruning at the rosemary bush Beverly had planted the year Zoe was born. Now, I said, you come home and I teach you how to take care of what matters. 3 days later, I stood in my bedroom with a single suitcase open on the bed, looking at the clothes that would carry me into my new life. 2 weeks' worth of shirts, pants, underwear, socks, the shaving kit Beverly had given me for our 20th anniversary because she loved the smell of sandalwood. One photograph, Beverly and me at Myrtle Beach in 1987, both of us laughing at something I couldn't remember but could still feel. I'd called Anna the night before. I'm ready, I'd told her. Sempre, she'd replied, always. The house has been waiting. My ticket was for Thursday morning, one way to Faro with a connection through Newark. I'd used Beverly's travel fund card, the one she'd labeled for when we dare. Funny how daring looked so much like running away until you realized you were running towards something instead. I was folding my last shirt when I heard the front door open. Keys in the lock, footsteps that belonged to someone who still believed she had the right to come and go as she pleased. Grandpa. Zoe's voice carried through the house, tentative but determined. I found her in the kitchen, standing next to a duffel bag that looked like it had been packed in a hurry. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore the expression of someone who'd made a decision that scared and excited her in equal measure. Going somewhere? I asked. With you, she said simply. If you'll have me. I sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly feeling every one of my 74 years. Sweetheart, this isn't a vacation. I'm not coming back. I know. She sat across from me, her hands folded like she was praying or preparing for battle. Grandpa, I've been thinking about what Grandma wrote in that note, about teaching me how to keep what matters. And I can't learn that from my parents. They've spent my whole life teaching me that what matters is what other people think, what makes you look successful, what keeps you comfortable. Her voice grew stronger with each word. But Grandma knew different. She knew that what matters is what you protect, what you build, what you pass on. I looked at this girl, this young woman who carried Beverly's eyes and her own fierce intelligence. What about college? I talked to my advisor. I can take a gap year, maybe transfer to a Portuguese university, learn the language, help you settle in, figure out what I actually want to study instead of what everyone expects me to study. Your parents will never forgive me. Zoe's laugh was sharp, bitter in a way that made me sad for what my children had taught her. My parents are worried about their social standing in a neighborhood where they can't afford to live driving cars they can't afford to buy, maintaining a lifestyle that depends on other people's money. I don't need their forgiveness for choosing something real. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. Besides, I wrote them a letter, told them exactly why I'm leaving and what they'd have to do to earn me back. It's not cruel, but it's honest. I thought about Beverly's letter, about the way she'd seen this moment coming and prepared for it. You know, there's no guarantee this will work out. Portugal is a foreign country. The language is different. The culture is different. Good, Zoe said firmly. Maybe different is exactly what I need. I studied her face, looking for doubt, for the kind of romantic idealism that would crumble at the first real difficulty. Instead, I saw something that reminded me of Beverly at 19, fierce and uncompromising and absolutely certain about what mattered. There's something else, I said, reaching for my phone. Anna mentioned that your grandmother left some things for you in Portugal. A college fund, she said, but bigger than what you'd need for tuition. Zoe's eyes widened. How much bigger? I don't know, but knowing your grandmother big enough to give you real choices about your future. The flight to Portugal felt like traveling backward through history. For 4 generations, my family had been part of the Great Migration, moving north from Alabama to find work and dignity and space to breathe. Now here I was, James Washington's great-grandson, moving in the opposite direction, not running from oppression, but toward possibility. Zoe slept for most of the flight, her head on my shoulder, looking younger than her 19 years. I watched the Atlantic pass beneath us and thought about Beverly, about how she'd somehow known this day would come and prepared for it. Not just the house and the money, but Zoe herself. She'd been preparing Zoe for this moment without any of us realizing it. The conversations about family history, the stories about ancestors who'd made hard choices and lived with the consequences. The way she'd taught Zoe to see beyond surface appearances, to question what adults told her, to value independence over approval. Beverly had been raising a granddaughter who could choose Portugal over comfort, truth over convenience, possibility over security. When we landed in Faro, Anna was waiting with a sign that read, "Washington Family," in her careful handwriting. She looked exactly as I'd imagined, compact, competent, with the kind of smile that reached her eyes and meant what it promised. "Senor Washington," she said, embracing me like an old friend. "And this beautiful girl must be Zoe. You knew I was coming," Zoe asked, accepting Anna's hug with the easy grace of someone raised by Beverly Washington. "Your grandmother told me," Anna said simply. "She said one day James will need to disappear, and when he does, the girl will follow. Make sure there's room for both of them." We drove through countryside that looked like a postcard, white houses scattered across green hills, olive trees that had been growing since before America was a country. Anna pointed out landmarks, markets, the beach where the locals swam, the cafes where she'd introduce us as Beverly's family. "Your grandmother visited once," Anna told Zoe as we turned into the lane with stone walls. 2 years ago, when she was sick but still fighting. She stood in the garden behind the house and said, "This is where James will remember how to breathe, and where Zoe will learn who she really is." The house appeared around a curve, white walls and blue shutters and red tiles that had weathered 100 Portuguese storms. Bougainvillea spilled over the garden walls like purple celebration. "Home," Anna said simply. I looked at Zoe, at the wonder in her eyes, as she took in this place her grandmother had chosen for us. "What do you think?" "I think," Zoe said slowly, "Grandma knew exactly what she was doing." That night, after Anna had left us with fresh linens and a bowl of lemons, and promises to return in the morning, Zoe and I sat on the terrace watching the Mediterranean turn from blue to black. "Grandpa," she said, "do you think they'll try to find us?" "Eventually," I said. "But by then, we'll be ready." "Ready for what?" I thought about Beverly's letter, about the conservation trust, about the college fund waiting in a Portuguese bank, about all the ways she'd prepared for this moment without any of us understanding what she was building. Ready to show them the difference between a family that owns you and a family that frees you. Zoe leaned against my shoulder the way she had on the airplane, and I felt something I hadn't experienced since Beverly died, the future opening up instead of closing down. Tomorrow we would start learning Portuguese. Tomorrow we would explore the village, meet the neighbors, begin the work of building a life that belonged to us instead of to other people's expectations. But tonight we sat in the warm Portuguese air and listened to the sea, 2 generations of the Washington family finally free to find out who we were when nobody was keeping score. The house was everything Anna had promised, and more than Beverly's letters had prepared me for. White walls that caught the morning light and held at gently blue shutters that looked like they'd been painted by someone who understood the difference between decoration and invitation. The red tile roof had weathered storms and seasons with the dignity of something built to last. Inside, the floors were cool terracotta that felt honest under my feet. The living room opened to views of olive groves that rolled down toward the Mediterranean, and I could see why Beverly had chosen this place. It demanded nothing but presence. "Your Beverly came here during her treatments," Anna said as she showed us through the rooms. 3 times she told no one. She would sit on the terrace for hours planning. Zoe ran her fingers along the built-in bookshelves already filled with volumes in Portuguese and English. "Planning what?" "Planning you," Anna said simply. "Both of you." She knew this day would come. The kitchen was small but complete with copper pots that gleamed like promises and a window that framed the lemon tree in the garden. Anna had stocked the refrigerator with basics, bread, cheese, fruit, wine that she assured me was gentle enough for afternoon drinking. "There is something else," Anna said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out an envelope, cream-colored and heavy, with Zoe's name written in Beverly's unmistakable handwriting. "She gave this to me 2 years ago, said to give it to the girl only when she was here in this house ready to listen." Zoe took the envelope with the reverence of someone handling sacred text. "Should I read it now?" "That is for you to decide," Anna said. "But I think your grandmother would want you to read it where she wrote it." She led us to a small desk by the window positioned so the writer could look out at the garden while working. The wood was worn smooth in places, and I could imagine Beverly sitting there during her secret visits, planning our escape. Zoe sat at the desk and opened the envelope. Her eyes moved across the page, and I watched her expression change from curiosity to recognition to something deeper. When she finished, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "She knew," Zoe said quietly. "She knew exactly what they would do, exactly how I would feel, exactly what I would need to hear." "What does it say?" I asked. Zoe cleared her throat and read, "My dearest Zoe, if you are reading this, it means your grandfather has done something very brave and you have been brave enough to follow him. It means you have chosen truth over comfort, possibility over security, love over obligation. Your parents are not bad people, but they have confused loving you with controlling you, confused providing for you with taking credit for provisions they did not make. They love your potential more than they love your person, and that kind of love always comes with strings attached. I have watched 4 generations of our family struggle with the same pattern. Children who see their parents as resources rather than people. Parents who mistake their children's success for their own worth. Families that keep score instead of keeping faith. You have the chance to break that pattern, not just for yourself, but for the children you might have someday, for the family you might build. That is why your grandfather's money is in the bank in Lisbon, why this house is here waiting, why Anna has become part of our family. Some people will tell you that family means accepting whatever treatment people give you because you share blood. That is not family. That is captivity with a prettier name. Real family means people who love you enough to let you disappoint them, who support your dreams even when they don't understand them, who celebrate your independence instead of trying to control it. Your grandfather understands this. That is why I chose him 45 years ago and why I am trusting him to help you understand it now. Be brave, my darling girl. Be honest. Be free. And remember that the best way to honor the people who came before you is to become the person they hoped you could be, not the person they tried to make you be. The room was quiet when she finished reading, filled only with the sound of wind through the olive trees and the distant conversation of the sea. Anna wiped her eyes with a handkerchief that looked like it had absorbed many tears over many years. Your grandmother, she understood something most people never learn, that love without freedom is not love, is possession. She stood and walked to the window looking out at the garden. She told me about her first husband's family, how they tried to make her small, how they wanted her to be grateful instead of equal. She said she learned then that some families are prisons and others are launching pads. What kind of family are we building here? Zoe asked. Anna turned back to us with the smile of someone who had found her answer through hard experience. The kind that teaches you to fly, not the kind that clips your wings. We spent the afternoon exploring the house and garden. Anna showed us where the hot water heater lived, how to work the temperamental shower, which plants needed daily watering, and which preferred to be left alone. Practical information, but delivered with the care of someone passing down family knowledge. Your Beverly planted the rosemary herself, Anna said, pointing to a robust bush near the kitchen door. She said it would remind James of home. And the lemon tree she chose because Zoe would need to learn that some things take time to grow, but are worth the waiting. As evening approached, Anna prepared to leave. Tomorrow I will take you to the bank in Lisbon. Your grandmother's gift is waiting there. Then to the market to meet people to begin your Portuguese life. After she left, Zoe and I sat on the terrace with glasses of the gentle wine Anna had recommended. The Mediterranean stretched before us, vast and patient and utterly indifferent to our small human dramas. Grandpa, Zoe said, do you think we made the right choice? I thought about my house in America, about the garden Beverly and I had built, about the life we'd constructed with such care only to watch our children try to auction it off piece by piece. I think, I said finally, that your grandmother spent 2 years preparing for this moment. She bought this house, learned Portuguese law, befriended Anna, set up bank accounts, and wrote letters we're still finding. If Beverly Washington thought this was the right choice, then it was the right choice. Zoe leaned back in her chair and looked up at stars that seemed brighter here than they ever had in America. I want to learn Portuguese, she said. I want to understand Anna when she talks to her neighbors. I want to know the names of these flowers, the history of this place, the stories that made Beverly fall in love with it. We have time, I said. That's the gift she gave us. Time to figure out who we are when we're not performing for people who've already decided what we should be. As night settled over the White House with blue shutters, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Beverly died, the future opening up instead of closing down. Tomorrow we would begin the work of building a life that belonged to us, guided by the wisdom of a woman who had loved us enough to set us free. Within 2 months, Zoe was dreaming in Portuguese. I watched her transformation with the amazement of someone witnessing a butterfly emerge from its chrysalis. She'd wake up each morning and walk to the village bakery chatting with Senora Martinez about her grandchildren, discussing weather patterns with old Manuel who tended the olive groves, bargaining playfully with the fishmonger who brought his catch up from the coast. Bom dia, Senor Washington. The neighbors would call to me as I followed my granddaughter through the narrow streets. Good morning, Mr. Washington. They'd known us for 8 weeks, but in a village where some families had lived for 8 centuries, that was enough time to be accepted. Anna had introduced us properly, which in a Portuguese village means explaining not just who you are, but why you belong. This is Beverly's husband and granddaughter, she would say. Beverly was the American woman who helped my family stay together. Now they are our family too. It was a simple equation that transcended nationality and language. Beverly had helped Anna, therefore we were welcome. In a culture that valued loyalty and gratitude, that was passport enough. Zoe threw herself into community life with the enthusiasm of someone discovering she had talents she didn't know existed. She helped Anna's daughter Sophia with English tutoring for local children. She organized a weekly conversation group where Portuguese speakers could practice English while she practiced Portuguese. She even convinced the village priest to let her help with the church's outreach to African immigrants, using her grandfather's experiences to build bridges across cultural divides. "Your granddaughter has a gift," Anna told me one evening as we watched Zoe mediate a heated discussion between two village women about water rights. "She sees connections where other people see only differences." It was true. Zoe had inherited Beverly's ability to find common ground in disputed territory, to translate not just language, but intent to build understanding where others saw only conflict. One afternoon, while helping Anna organize her late husband's papers, I discovered something that explained Beverly's connection to this place more fully. Hidden in a folder marked "Important Documents" were college transcripts for Sofia Santos and her brother Miguel. Both had attended university in Lisbon. Both had graduated with honors. Both had their tuition payments traced back to an American benefactor, Beverly Marie Washington. "She never told you," Anna said when I confronted her with the documents. "Your wife, she paid for my children's education. All of it. University books, living expenses. 8 years of payments, never missed one." I sat heavily in Anna's kitchen chair, overwhelmed by another layer of Beverly's secret generosity. "Why didn't she tell me?" "Because she knew you would worry about the money. You were saving for your own grandchild's education. Beverly, she found other ways to help my family without taking from yours." "Other ways?" Anna smiled with the fondness of someone remembering a dear friend's harmless deception. "Your wife, she was very good at finding extra work. Translating documents, tutoring immigrant children, helping people fill out government forms. She told you it was volunteer work. It was volunteer work. But volunteer work that paid. She would take no money for helping people, but she would let them pay for her children to go to school in Portugal." "Very clever woman, your Beverly." That evening I told Zoe about her grandmother's hidden scholarship program. She listened with the intensity of someone receiving religious instruction. "So Grandma didn't just save Anna's family from deportation," Zoe said. "She invested in their future." "For 15 years, I confirmed. "Sofia is a doctor now, Miguel is a teacher, both because your grandmother saw potential where others saw only problems." Zoe was quiet for a long time, staring out at the Mediterranean as it caught the last light of day. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a new certainty. "Grandpa, I know what I want to study." "Portuguese literature," I guessed. "International law," she said. "Immigration law specifically. I want to do what Grandma did, but bigger. I want to help families stay together, legally, help people navigate systems that are designed to exclude them, help communities integrate without losing their identity." I looked at my granddaughter and saw Beverly's vision finally coming into focus. Not just the escape plan, not just the financial security, but the purpose. Beverly had brought us here not just to hide from our family's greed, but to show Zoe what generosity looked like when it was practiced as a way of life rather than a tax deduction. "There's a good law program in Lisbon," Anna said the next day when Zoe told her about her decision. "Sofia knows the professors there. She could make introductions. And my Portuguese is getting good enough for university classes," Zoe added. "I've been reading legal documents with the priest. He says I have a natural talent for understanding complex language." I watched my granddaughter plan her future with the confidence of someone who had finally found her calling, and I understood what Beverly had been building all along. Not just financial security, but moral purpose. Not just the escape route, but a launching pad. That night, Zoe called her parents. I listened from the kitchen as she explained her decision in Portuguese accented English, her voice calm and certain. "I'm studying international law at the University of Lisbon," she told them. "Grandpa is helping me apply, and Anna's daughter is helping me prepare for the entrance exams." I couldn't hear their response, but Zoe's reply was clear. "No, I don't need your permission. And no, I don't need your money. Grandma took care of everything." When she hung up, she found me in the kitchen preparing dinner. "They're not happy," she said simply. "Are you—" She considered the question seriously, the way Beverly had taught her to consider all important questions. "I'm not happy the way they want me to be happy," she said finally. "But I'm happy the way Grandma wanted me to be happy. The way that comes from knowing you're building something that matters." That I realized was the difference between the family we'd left and the family we were building. One measured happiness by compliance, the other by contribution. One valued comfort, the other valued character. Beverly had known which kind of family Zoe needed to become the person she was meant to be. 6 months into our Portuguese adventure, my phone rang with a video call from a number I recognized but hadn't heard from in weeks. Keisha's face appeared on the screen, and I could see immediately that something had changed. She looked tired, but it was the clean exhaustion of someone doing hard work rather than the brittle fatigue of someone avoiding it. "Daddy," she said, and her voice carried none of the defensive edge I'd grown accustomed to. "Can we talk?" Zoe was at the kitchen table reviewing Portuguese legal texts for her university entrance exam. She looked up when she heard her mother's voice, but didn't move to join the conversation. Smart girl. She'd learned that some conversations require space to breathe. "We can talk," I said, "but I want you to know up front that I'm not coming home and I'm not changing my mind about the house." "I know," Keisha said quickly. "That's not why I'm calling. I'm calling to apologize. Really apologize, not the kind where I explain why I was right to be wrong." I set the phone on the counter where both Zoe and I could see the screen. "I'm listening." "I've been going to therapy," Keisha began. "Started right after you left. At first I went because I was angry at you for making me look bad in front of my daughter, but Dr. Martinez, she has a way of asking questions that make you see things differently." She paused, gathering herself. "She asked me to trace back when I stopped seeing you as my father and started seeing you as a resource, when I stopped asking what you needed and started calculating what you could provide." "When did that happen?" I asked gently. "When Jennifer joined the family," Keisha said, and I heard the honesty that costs something to speak. She was so confident about financial planning, about maximizing assets, about thinking strategically. I started seeing our family through her eyes, and her eyes see everything as either an opportunity or an obstacle. Zoe closed her textbook and leaned forward. "Mom, you let her turn Grandpa into a retirement plan." "I did," Keisha agreed, and the simple admission carried more weight than any elaborate explanation could have. "And I let her turn you into a justification for it. Every time we took credit for Grandpa's help, we were teaching you that love means taking credit for other people's generosity." I watched my daughter's face on the small screen and saw something I hadn't seen since she was a child. Genuine remorse without the performance of it. "What do you want from me, Keisha?" I asked. "Permission to earn you back," she said. "Not forgiveness because I haven't earned that yet, but permission to try." I looked at Zoe, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "What does earning look like?" "Honesty," Keisha said. "With you, with Zoe, with myself. I told Dr. Martinez everything. About the money we took credit for, about the conservatorship threats, about how we talked about you when you weren't there. She's helping me understand why I thought that was acceptable. And I'm learning that being a single mother doesn't give me the right to use my father as a bank. That being tired doesn't justify being manipulative. That being scared about my financial future doesn't mean I get to colonize yours." Zoe spoke for the first time. "What about Dad and Jennifer?" Keisha's expression hardened slightly. "Your father is angry that his inheritance evaporated. Jennifer is angry that her social standing took a hit when the neighbors figured out why you two disappeared. They're not ready for therapy. They're still convinced that they were trying to help and you two were ungrateful. And you, I'm grateful that Grandpa loved me enough to set boundaries," Keisha said, looking directly at me through the camera. "Even when it meant losing his family, he chose truth over peace. That's not something a selfish person does." We talked for another hour, carefully and honestly. Keisha told me about her financial struggles, but as information rather than manipulation. She asked about our life in Portugal with genuine curiosity rather than performative concern. She listened when Zoe described her studies without trying to redirect the conversation toward more practical choices. When the call ended, Zoe and I sat quietly for a while. Outside, Anna was hanging laundry on the line that connected her house to her neighbors, a daily ritual that spoke of community and continuity. "Do you think she means it?" Zoe asked. "I think she wants to mean it," I said. "Whether she can sustain the work it takes to mean it, that remains to be seen. Should we let her visit?" I considered the question carefully. "When she's earned it. When she can demonstrate that she sees me as her father rather than her solution to financial problems." When she can spend time with you without trying to convince you to come home and be the daughter they want instead of the woman you're becoming. Zoe nodded thoughtfully. Grandma was right about boundaries. They're not walls to keep people out. They're gates that teach people how to come in properly. 3 months later, Keisha called to tell me she'd taken a second job to pay back the money she'd taken credit for giving to Zoe. 6 months after that, she sent a letter she'd written to Zoe, taking full responsibility for the lies they'd told about my financial contributions. "I want to visit," she said during one of our monthly calls. "Not to convince you to come home, not to check on whether you're managing your money properly, but because I miss my father, and I want to meet the version of my daughter who's brave enough to build her own life. When you're ready," I told her, "the gate will be open." Some reconciliations happen quickly in the heat of emotion and the relief of resolution. Others take time built one honest conversation at a time, one boundary respected at a time, one choice to prioritize relationship over convenience at a time. Keisha was learning that love isn't about getting what you want from people. It's about helping them become who they're meant to be, even when that person is inconveniently different from who you thought they should be. Beverly would have been proud of the progress. Slow, difficult, honest progress toward the kind of family that frees instead of binds. 1 year after our arrival in Portugal, I stood in the garden behind our white house watching Zoe practice her Portuguese with Anna's grandson who was visiting from Lisbon. The conversation flowed between languages like water finding its level, and I marveled at how natural it had become for her to exist in two worlds simultaneously. The trust fund Beverly had established matured on Zoe's 20th birthday, making her independently wealthy in a way that had nothing to do with her parents' expectations or my charity. $200,000 carefully invested and grown over the years, Beverly had been planning our escape. Enough for Zoe to attend any university she chose, to build any life she envisioned, to never again have to calculate the cost of disappointing someone who claimed to love her. "I want to use some of it to expand Anna's immigration assistance program," Zoe told me when the lawyers in Lisbon explained the terms of her inheritance. "Grandma would have liked that." She was right. Beverly would have loved seeing her granddaughter choose generosity over security, purpose over comfort. Keisha had visited twice now, carefully and respectfully, staying in a small hotel in the village rather than assuming she could occupy our space. The conversations were still tender, still careful, but they were real in a way that our old family dynamics had never allowed. She was learning to see Zoe as an adult rather than a project, learning to see me as a person rather than a resource. David and Jennifer's marriage had not survived the revelation that their lifestyle had been subsidized by the man they'd tried to warehouse in their basement. The divorce proceedings were bitter, and public fought over assets that had never really belonged to either of them. Their Oakwood Heights neighbors had the scandal they'd been waiting for, and both David and Jennifer had learned the hard lesson that social standing built on borrowed money collapses quickly when the borrowing stops. But that was their story to write, now their consequences to manage. I had taught them what I could about dignity and respect and the difference between love and ownership. Whether they chose to learn those lessons was no longer my responsibility. In the evening, Zoe and I would sit on our terrace with glasses of wine and Portuguese cheese, watching the Mediterranean hold the last light of day. These conversations had become my graduate course in parenting, teaching me things I wished I'd understood when my own children were young. "The difference between helping and enabling," I told her one night, "is whether your help makes someone stronger or more dependent." "The difference between love and control," she replied, "is whether you celebrate someone's independence or try to prevent it." We had both learned Beverly's final lesson, that the greatest gift you can give someone is the strength to live without you and the wisdom to choose to be with you anyway. As the Portuguese stars appeared overhead, I thought about the man I'd been a year ago, standing in an American kitchen while his children auctioned off his dignity. That man felt like a stranger, now someone I'd once known but had outgrown. Beverly had known this day would come. She'd known that sometimes the only way to save a family is to leave it, that sometimes the only way to teach love is to withhold it until it's offered freely, that sometimes the greatest act of faith is trusting people you've raised to find their own way back to the values you